Hello everyone, my name is Mohinder Ramnarayan and welcome to another exciting lesson while we help you get prepared for SEA. In today's lesson, we'll be focusing on comprehension. In this lesson, I will be looking at poetry analysis. Over the years, poetry has proven to be one of the more difficult areas of the paper. In this lesson, I will show you how fun and exciting it can be to analyze a poem. Many students think that poetry is boring, wordy, and difficult to understand. But this is quite the opposite. Poetry is actually fun. It's a great way to express your feelings and emotions, and it can even be used to tell a story. Remember, questions on the poem contribute a total of 20 marks to the English Language Arts paper. Questions based on the poem would be at 3 different levels: literal, inferential, and evaluation appreciation. Vocabulary is also examined in context in the poetry section. For more information, visit www.moe.govt. For all the materials used in today's presentation, as well as the ELA specimen papers 1 and 2 and the English Language Arts specimen items for SEA, visit www.moe.govt as well as learn.moe.govt. Let's begin by looking at the 3 different types of questions that will be found in the poetry section. The first type of question would be the literal question. Literal questions ask students to recall information explicitly stated in the poem. These can be answered directly and explicitly from the poem. The second type of question would be the inferential questions. The answers to these are in the poem or text, but are not explicitly stated. Connections need to be made in order to determine the answer. You can work out the answers by considering the hints and clues in the poem in light of your own knowledge and experience. And finally, we have the evaluation questions and the appreciation questions. For the evaluation questions, you must think about the poem and write your answers based on your assessment of the poem. Your answers must be linked to the poem and based on its details. Similarly, for the appreciation question, these allow you to provide an answer based on your emotional response and connection with the poem. These questions ask you, what do you appreciate or do not appreciate about the poem crafted? Let's begin today with our first objective. Our first objective deals with retrieving information that is stated explicitly in the poem. These would be your literal questions. Let's read a poem. As I lay upon my back, looking at the sky, watching soft white clouds passing by, some large, some quite small, many different shapes and sizes I recall. As I lay there and watched the clouds take shape, from my imagination a million images did escape. I could see anything that was in my mind's eye in those fluffy white clouds as they went floating by. For hours on end, no 2 images were ever the same, as the clouds on their journey came. As if on film, this movie played, while quietly on my back I stayed. Music came to the movie that played in the sky by all the different birds, their songs, a soothing lullaby. So beautifully orchestrated and done for me, that movie was crafted for me to see. I'm sure that you enjoyed that poem. Let's take a look at some literal questions. Remember, the answers to these are clearly stated in the poem. Examples of these would be, what was the poet doing? What did the poet see when he looked up? State 2 words used by the poet to describe the clouds. Name 1 animal mentioned in the poem. I'm sure you were able to figure those out already. Let's check. Our first question asks, what was the poet doing? Let's take a look at this question. The question asks us to consider, what was the poet doing? The word doing, it's a verb, so we would go to our poem and look for verbs to help us figure out what the poet was doing. Where can I find this answer? Well, we can find the answer in the very first line of stanza 1. As I lay on my back, looking at the sky, watching soft white clouds passing by. I'm sure you would have guessed it already. The poet was lying on his back looking at the clouds. Let's take a look at our second question. What did the poet see when he looked up? To be able to answer this question, we need to check for the word see or synonyms that are contained in the poem. Where can I find the answer? Well, again, we can find the answer in lines 1 and 2 of stanza 1. As I lay on my back, looking at the sky, watching soft white clouds passing by. The words looking and watching are synonyms for the word see. These would indicate to us that we would find our answer to the question, what did the poet see when he looked up in this part of the poem? What did the poet see? Well, he saw clouds passing by. Let's take a look at our next question. This question asks us to state 2 words used by the poet to describe the clouds. Remember, the question only asks us for 2 words, and these words must be used to describe clouds. You only need 2 words, and the word describes tells us that we are looking for words that are used to describe clouds. Clouds are nouns, so we are looking for adjectives. Let's go to our poem and look for our adjectives. As I lay on my back, looking at the sky, watching soft white clouds passing by, some large, some quite small, many different shapes and sizes I recall. As I lay there and watched the clouds take shape, from my imagination a million things did escape. I could see anything that was in my mind's eye in those fluffy white clouds as they went floating by. So let's look for words, for the words cloud or clouds, or words that refer to clouds in the poem. The word cloud and some refer to clouds. Now let's look for words that are used to describe the clouds. The words soft, white, large, small, fluffy, and white are all words that can be used to describe the clouds that were seen by the poet. In the rest of the poem, the word cloud is used. However, there are no more adjectives or describing words in these stanzas. Therefore, our answer to the question, state 2 words used by the poet to describe the clouds, would be any 2 from soft, white, fluffy, small, or large. These can be found in stanzas 1 and 2. Let's review. So far, we have learned that the answers to literal questions can be found right there in the text. Answer only what the question is asking. And finally, look for words in the question that signal where in the passage you can start searching for your answer. Stay tuned for lesson 2.
Hi, I'm Dr. Stephanie Fletcher-Larty, and I'm a consultant here at Caribbean Public Health Agency. I thought I would explain a few terms just to help the community understand better some of the big words that we use when we talk on the news. My first term I'm going to talk about is imported cases. Imported cases are those individuals who contracted the disease in another country and were tested positive when they got home to their home country. So that's an imported case. The second term I want to talk about is local transmission. Local transmission is usually used when someone in the community has caught COVID-19 from someone else who brought it in from overseas. For example, the person's wife came home from overseas, tested positive for COVID-19, and the husband, who did not travel and came in contact with the wife, got the disease as well. So that's local transmission. Now, the last term I want to talk about is community transmission. Some people may call this community spread. Community spread usually refers to the fact that there are several people in the community who have tested positive for COVID-19, and these people do not have a travel history, or they cannot recall coming in contact with anyone that they know has the disease. So that is community transmission. So these words are different, and they have different meanings to people like myself who work in public health. I do hope that helps to clarify the difference between imported cases, local transmission, and community spread. Thank you.
Welcome again, and thank you for staying with us. Let's go straight into Lesson 2. Lesson 2 deals with identifying figures of speech in literary text. These would be simile, metaphor, and personification. Because we are only asked to identify these figures of speech, this question would be at the literal level. Figures of speech are words or phrase that diverges from its normal meaning. It is not based on the literal meaning of the words. They often provide emphasis, freshness of expression, or clarity. These include metaphors, simile, or personification. A simile is a comparison made using as or like. Let's look at this example. The mango chow was hot like fire. The mango chow is compared here to fire using the word like. Mango chow, fire, tells us that the mango chow was extremely hot. Let's look at another example. Remember, a simile is a comparison made using as or like. My bag is as heavy as a truckload of bricks. Here, the weight of the person's bag is being compared to the weight of a truckload of bricks. Bag, truckload of bricks. Well, of course, if you were to carry around a truckload of bricks, you would end up with some severe back pain. So the weight of the bag is compared to a truckload of bricks using the word as. This is an example of a simile. Another type of figure of speech would be the metaphor. A metaphor is a comparison made without using as or like. An example would be, the curtain of night quickly fell upon us. Here, the night is compared to a curtain. What happens when a curtain is drawn? It normally gets very dark very quickly. Here, the descent of darkness is compared to a curtain being drawn, telling us that it got dark very quickly. Let's look at another example. Remember, a metaphor is a comparison made without using as or like. Rodney had to slither through the crowd to get to his destination. Rodney's movement is compared to slithering. What animal slithers? A snake. So here, Rodney's movement through the crowd is compared to that of a snake. In order to get through the crowd, Rodney had to make the slithering movements of a snake. And finally, we have the personification. Personification is when an inanimate object is given human-like qualities. An example would be the coconut trees danced in the wind. Here, the movement of the coconut trees is being compared to dancing. I am sure that you would have visited one of our many beaches before and would have seen the coconut trees swaying in the wind. This movement is compared to that of dancing, which is done by people. The wind blowing through the coconut trees gave them the appearance of dancing. Because we gave the coconut tree the ability to dance, we consider that to be a personification. Let's look at another example. Remember, a personification is when inanimate objects are given human qualities. The sun peeped playfully through the clouds. The sun peeped playfully tells us that the sun was playing a game of some sort with the clouds. The sun, although the dark clouds were present, one could still see the sun, similar to when you are playing peekaboo with a baby. Because the sun is given the ability to peep, this literary device is considered to be a personification. Here, the sun is given human-like qualities. Let's check. Let's see if you have been paying attention so far. I want you to identify one simile used in stanza 3 of the poem. Well, I'll take you directly to stanza 3. For hours on end, no two images were ever the same, as the clouds on their journey came. As if on film, this movie played, while quietly on my back I stayed. Remember, a simile is a comparison using as or like. The word as is used twice in this stanza. Which line contains the simile? The first as is used as a conjunction. It joins the first sentence to the second, so it's not the simile. Therefore, as if on film is our simile in this stanza because it compares the images formed by the clouds to the images that will be projected on film. Let's see if you have been paying attention. I want you to identify one metaphor used in stanza 3 of the poem. Remember, a metaphor is a comparison made without using as or like. Let's read the stanza again. For hours on end, no two images were ever the same, as the clouds on their journey came. As if on film, this movie played, while quietly on my back I stayed. Here, we are asked to identify the metaphor in stanza 3 of the poem. The clouds are compared to images and movie. The metaphor can be found in the line, this movie played, because the cloud is compared, the movement of the clouds is compared to a movie. Let's see if you've been paying attention thus far. Let's do a practice exercise. I want you to state whether each of the following is a simile, metaphor, or personification. I was as calm as a waveless ocean. The kitchen is the heart of the home. He roars like a lion when he is cheering his favorite team. The storm took the house in its teeth and shook it. Daniel, the human lightning bolt, won the race. The green vines wound their arms around the rusty gate. I'm sure that you were able to figure these out quite easily. Let's check and see if you were correct. I was as calm as a waveless ocean. Here, the person is compared to a waveless ocean using the words as, because it's a comparison using the words as, it's a simile. The kitchen is the heart of the home. Here, the kitchen is compared to a heart being the center or one of the most vital organs in our body. Because we compare the kitchen to the heart, but we do not use the words as or like, this would be a metaphor. He roars like a lion when he's cheering his favorite team. Here, the person's cheering is being compared to the roaring of a lion using the word like. Because it's a comparison using the word like, this is a simile. The storm took the house in its teeth and shook it. Storms don't generally have teeth, but humans do. Because the storm is given human-like qualities, then you guessed it correct. This is an example of personification. Daniel, the human lightning bolt, won the race. Daniel is being compared to a lightning bolt. Lightning bolts normally flash very quickly. Daniel's movement during the race is compared to the flashing of the lightning bolt. Because we have a comparison here without using as or like, then this would be an example of a metaphor. And finally, the green vines wound their arms around the rusty gate. Well, vines don't generally have arms, but because humans do, and the vine is an inanimate object, this would be an example of personification. Congratulations, I'm sure that you got all of those correct. Let's review what we have learned so far in this lesson. We have learned that a simile is a comparison made using as or like. We have learned that a metaphor is a comparison made without using as or like. And we have learned that personification is when inanimate objects are given human-like qualities. Stay tuned. When we return, we are going to continue with today's lesson.
With so much information about COVID-19 on the news, children can become overwhelmed and even fearful, especially if they have a medical condition. As a parent, you can help to manage your child's fears and anxiety. Provide your child with the correct information about the virus. Remind them to wash their hands frequently with soap and water and to cover their cough and sneezes with a tissue or into their elbow. Monitor what your child sees about COVID-19, especially on social media, where the information may be misleading. Be aware of your own response. Instead of panicking or appearing anxious, reacting calmly could help to allay your child's fears and anxiety, and they too will model your behavior. Remember, how your child responds is dependent on you.
SEA students, schools closed but your learning continues with KFC and JJ and Friends SEA Success Series. Learn math, language arts, creative writing and comprehension, all based on the Ministry of Education's SEA 2019 to 2023 framework while in the comfort and safety of your home. Our program covers numbers, measurement, money, geometry, statistics, parts of speech, subject-verb agreement, conjunctions and joining sentences, active and passive voice, classical analysis, sentence analysis, direct and indirect speech, punctuation, spelling, and vocabulary. Create a virtual learning classroom in the safety of your home. Tune in Monday to Friday at 8 a.m. and Saturday and Sunday at 9 a.m. on TTT or follow us on Facebook at JJ and Friends for the KFC and JJ and Friends SEA Success Series.
Welcome back and thanks for staying with us. In this part of the lesson, we will look at identifying words that appeal to the senses and using context clues. In this part of the lesson, we will look at identifying words or language used to appeal to the senses. Because we are simply asked to identify the words, these questions would be at the literal level. We would look at identifying words or language used to create a specific mood. Because we are asked to infer meaning into the poem, these questions are at the inferential level. And finally, we will look at using context clues, word structure clues or definition clues, and background knowledge to determine the meaning of words or phrases. Again, because we are asked to use our knowledge together with what is presented in the poem, these questions would be at the inferential level. Let's go straight into it and let's look at identifying words or language used to appeal to the senses. Humans have 5 senses, which include the ability to see, hear, touch, taste, and smell. Poets use specific words or language to appeal to our senses, allowing us to enjoy our poem. What is the main sense being appealed to in this stanza? As I lay upon my back, looking at the sky, watching soft white clouds passing by, some large, some quite small, many different shapes and sizes I recall. Well, to be able to answer that question, what you need to do is put yourself in the place of the poet. Which sense would you use to be able to do these things that the poet is speaking about in this stanza? Which sense organ would you need to look at the sky, to watch, to see the white clouds, to see the small clouds, to see the large clouds, to see the many different shapes and sizes of the clouds floating by? Well, you guessed it correct. You would need your sense of sight. So the main sense being appealed to in this stanza would be the sense of sight. Let's see if you can figure this one out. What is the main sense being appealed to in this stanza? Music came to the movie that played in the sky by all the different birds. Their songs a soothing lullaby. Which sense organ would you use to listen to music, to hear songs, or to even hear a soothing lullaby? Your ears. Because the organ that you would use to hear these things is your ear, then the sense being appealed to would be your sense of hearing. Can you find any other words or language and images in the poem that appeal to your senses? Let's take a look at the highlighted text on the poem. As I lay there and watched the clouds take shape, I could see anything that was in my mind's eye. Those fluffy white clouds went floating by. Because the highlighted words ask us to use our sense of sight, then these words or this stanza can generally be said to appeal to our sense of sight. Let's take a look at stanza 3. For hours on end, no two images were ever the same. Because this line asks us to consider images, we would need to use our eyes to look at these images. So this line would appeal to the sense of sight. Let's take a look at the last line of stanza 3. while quietly on my back I stayed. This line speaks of quietness, because you need to use your ears to identify quietness or noise. This line would appeal to your sense of hearing. And finally, let's take a look at the last two lines of the poem. That movie was created for me to see. Because these two lines speak of a movie, and seeing a movie, we need to use our eyes to be able to see this. Because we are using our eyes, these two lines are appealing to our sense of sight. Let's review what we've learned so far. We have learned that poems often use images that appeal to the reader's senses. To be able to identify which sense the poet is appealing to, we need to look for words that signal the appeal to the different senses. Let's look at our second objective in this part of the lesson. This objective deals with using context clues and background knowledge to determine the meaning of words or phrases. Because we are asked to use our knowledge together with what is presented in the poem again, these would be inferential questions. Context clues are hints found within a sentence, line, paragraph, or passage which helps a reader to understand new or unfamiliar words. Context clues are very helpful for learning new words and promote a better understanding of what is being read. Let's take a look at our poem again. Let's consider this question. According to the poem, what is the meaning of the word orchestrated in the last stanza? To be able to decipher the meaning of the word orchestrated, we not only need to consider the last stanza, but we need to consider the stanza before as well. Let's take a read. Music came to the movie that played in the sky. By all the different birds, their songs a soothing lullaby. So beautifully orchestrated and done for me, that movie was created for me to see. Now, let's consider what we have read so far. Let me give you a hint. An orchestra is a group of performers on various musical instruments. To be able to play together, they must be very organized. If not, then they wouldn't produce music, they would produce noise. Let me give you another hint to help you figure out the meaning of the word orchestrated. To figure out the meaning of the word orchestrated, examine the other words around orchestrated in the last stanza. Let's take a read of the last stanza. So beautifully orchestrated and done for me, that movie was created for me to see. The words done and created tell us that something was put together to create this beautifully orchestrated music. All these words tell us that the meaning of the word orchestrated in the context of this poem is planned, organized, or created. Therefore, we can infer that the meaning of the word orchestrated in the context that it was used in this poem would be planned, organized, or created. Let's review. We use context clues to discover the meaning of words used in the context of the poem to answer vocabulary questions. Stay tuned. When we return, we're going to look at Lesson 4 of today's program.
The following message is brought to you by the National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited, at the forefront of energy. Practice good personal hygiene and protect yourself against the COVID-19 virus. Wash your hands frequently with soap and water, scrubbing for at least 20 seconds, or in the absence of soap and water, use an alcohol-based hand sanitizer. Avoid touching your face with your hands regularly. This is a lot harder than it sounds and requires conscious effort. However, the average person touches their face 23 times an hour, and about half that time, they're touching their mouth, eyes, and nose, the mucosal surfaces that COVID-19 infects. Cover coughs and sneezes with the inside of your elbow or upper arm. Stay home if you're feeling sick and seek appropriate medical guidance. It's up to you to protect yourself and your loved ones from the COVID-19 virus. The preceding message was brought to you by the National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited, at the forefront of energy.
Welcome back. Let's continue with lesson 4 of today's program. In this lesson, we will be exploring mood. We will look at identifying words or language used to create a specific mood and making connections between literature and real-life situations. Again, because these questions ask us to consider our real-life experiences together with what we would have read in the poem, these are inferential type questions. Mood is the feeling created by the poet for the reader. It's a feeling that you get when you read the poem. It's quite different from tone, which is the feeling displayed by the poet towards the subject of the poem. Some words that can be used to describe mood are happy, excited, optimistic, sad, gloomy, pessimistic, angry, irate, frustrated, relaxed, blissful, tranquil, serene, fearful, scared, and frightened. How can we identify mood in a poem? Well, we can begin by looking for words that appeal to our emotions. Look for words that appeal to your senses and examine the setting of the poem. We put these all together and ask the question, how do all of these combined make you feel? When you answer that question, that is the mood created in the poem. Let's examine an excerpt from the poem, The Crocodile's Toothache by Shel Silverstein. The crocodile went to the dentist and sat down in the chair, and the dentist said, "Now tell me, sir, why does it hurt and where?" And the crocodile said, "I'll tell you the truth. I have a terrible ache in my tooth." And he opened his jaws so wide, that the dentist, he climbed right inside. And the dentist laughed, "Ha! Oh, isn't this fun?" as he pulled the tooth out one by one. And the crocodile cried, "You're hurting me so. Please put down your pliers and let me go." Let's consider what was the crocodile's mood in this poem. How would you feel if you were in a similar situation? What would your emotions be like? What would you feel like if you were placed in a setting? Remember, all of these would help you to figure out what was the crocodile's mood in the poem. And the crocodile said, "I'll tell you the truth. I have a terrible ache in my tooth." How would you feel if you had a toothache? And the crocodile said, "You're hurting me so. Please put down your pliers and let me go." How would being in that setting make you feel? Most of the highlighted words are associated with a negative feeling. The word please suggests an idea of pleading and desperation. Because of this, we can infer that the mood of the crocodile was depressed or desperate. Let's consider the mood of the dentist in the poem. And the dentist laughed, "Oh, isn't this fun?" as he pulled out the teeth one by one. The words laughed and fun suggest us that the dentist was enjoying what he was doing. Because of this, we can say that he was in a happy, excited, or exhilarated mood. Let's examine another excerpt from a poem. Let's look at an excerpt from the poem A Sudden Storm by Pius Oligui. The wind howls, the trees sway, those loose top sheets clatter and clang, the open windows shut with a bang, and the sky makes night of day. What mood is the poet trying to create? Let's look at the key words. Howls, clatter, clang, shut with a bang, night of day. How would you feel if you were placed in a similar setting? The setting here is a neighborhood that is about to experience a storm. If you said that you would feel eerie or scary, then you are correct. This would be the mood that the poet was aiming to create in this stanza of the poem. Let's go back to our poem, The Clouds. As I lay upon my back looking at the sky, watching soft white clouds passing by, some large, some quite small, many different shapes and sizes I recall. Let's see if you would be able to identify the mood in stanza 1 of the poem. Remember, how would you feel if you were doing this? Well, if you said that you would feel calm, peaceful, or relaxed, then you are correct. This would be the mood the author is trying to portray in stanza 1. Now try this one. As I lay there and watch the clouds take shape, from my imagination a million images did escape. I could see anything that was in my mind's eye in those fluffy white clouds as they went floating by. For this question, I want you to identify the mood in stanza 2 of the poem. Take a second and think about it. Think of all that you have learned so far. I'm sure that you would have gotten your answer by now. And if your answer was excited, optimistic, or hopeful, then you are correct. All of these words can be used to describe the poet's feeling in this stanza of the poem. He was excited to see the clouds passing by. He was optimistic or hopeful that he could create anything that he wanted to, or that he would see a very exciting movie. Remember, mode and tone can be easily confused. Tone refers to how the author feels towards a subject or towards something. The author's tone is implied by the words he uses. This is different from mood that refers to a feeling of the atmosphere the author is describing. It is what you feel when you read his writing. Example, one can read a sentence and feel very sad, happy, or angry. Let's review what we have learned so far. We have learned that mood in poetry refers to how a particular work makes you feel. To find the mood in a poem, we need to examine keywords that are designed to make the reader feel a particular way. And finally, the setting of a poem may also give you a hint about the mood. Stay tuned. When we continue, we're going to look at Lesson 5.
Knowledge is power. For students at home following the closure of school to contain the spread of the novel coronavirus, now you can view TDT and stream live on Facebook at TDT Live Online SEA Time, focusing on mathematics and language. All you have to do is tune in Monday to Fridays for mathematics at 9:15 a.m. and language at 1:15 p.m. SEA Time, Mondays to Fridays on TDT and streaming live on Facebook at TDT Live Online is an initiative of the Ministry of Education in conjunction with TDT Limited.
Welcome back and thank you for staying with me. Let's go straight into Lesson 5. In Lesson 5, we'll be looking at making connections between literature and real life. In this lesson, we will look at making connections between literature and real life situations, and we will also look at judging the nature of characters with supporting evidence. Making connections between literature and real life situations. These are inferential questions because they ask us to connect what we would have read with our real life experiences. This is when you connect the words and ideas you read to your experience. It helps you to understand what you're reading. You put yourself in the place of the writer based on what you know and what you have experienced. Let's consider these questions. Where do you think the poet was when he saw the clouds? Give a reason for your answer. Why is the word movie a suitable description of the actions of the cloud? Let's take a look at our first question. Our first question asks us, where do you think the poet was when he saw the clouds? Give a reason for your answer. To be able to answer these questions, as I said, you need to make connections between what was read in the poem and your real life experiences. The connection that you need to make here to be able to answer this question would be consideration of where the poet would need to be for the sky to be visible. And it must be a place where you would find birds, because birds are mentioned in the poem. Therefore, the answer needs to be a place where you can see the clouds and find birds. So our answer could be in the yard, in a playground, in a field, in the porch, near a window. Any place where you can lie and look at the clouds and hear birds would be a correct answer. The reason that we would give to support our answer would be because he could see the clouds and hear the birds sing. Let's consider our second question. Why is the word movie a suitable description for the action of the clouds? Here, the connection we need to make would be that the characters and scenes in a movie change. Therefore, the word movie is a suitable description for the action of the clouds because the scenes and characters in a movie change just as the clouds are changing size and shape as they were passing by. Let's move on to our next objective. In this objective, we will look at judging the nature of characters with supporting evidence, and these would be our evaluation, appreciation type question. In this type of questions, we ask you to draw conclusions about characters based on what you read. It is based on your values and beliefs. Let's consider the following question. Do you think the poet was lazy? Give a reason to support your answer. Well, in the poem, the poet is lying on his back looking at the clouds all day. How would you describe someone who does nothing all day beside that? But in the same poem, the poet was very creative in that he created an entire movie from the images that were passing by in the clouds. So, one plausible answer would be, yes, he was lazy because he did nothing for hours besides lie and look at the clouds passing. Another answer could be, no, he used his imagination for hours to create movies from passing clouds. So I would not consider him to be lazy. Remember, there is no wrong or right answer, but your answer must be justified. Your justification is what would make your answer correct. In this series so far, we have looked at retrieving information that is explicitly stated, identifying figures of speech in literary text. These would be a simile, metaphor, and personification. We have also looked at identifying words and language used to appeal to the senses, identifying words and language used to create a specific mood. We've also looked at using context clues. These would be word structure clues and definition clues, and background knowledge to determine the meaning of words or phrases. Making connections between literature and real-life situations. And finally, we looked at judging the nature of characters with supporting evidence. Let's revisit the poem Clouds and answer some questions. I'll give you a minute to read the poem. Now that you have completed reading the poem, I have some questions that I want you to consider. The first question is, what is described as a soothing lullaby in stanza 4? I'm sure you would have guessed it by now. The songs of the birds flying in the sky. Congratulations, you did well. Let's move on to our next question. In this question, I want you to identify one metaphor in the poem. I'm sure you remember the answer from earlier on. And it was as if on film this movie played. Let's move on to our next question. In this question, I want you to tell me what senses appeal to in the line, so beautifully orchestrated. Remember, to answer this question, you need to identify which organ you would use to hear the music that was beautifully orchestrated. The organ would be your ear, and because we're using our ears, the sense that is appealed to in this line would be our sense of hearing. Let's look at an inferential question. Why do you think no two images were ever the same? Explain your answer. Remember, to answer this question, you need to make connections between things that you would have experienced as well as what is written in the poem. I'm sure that you would have gotten your answer by now, and the answer to this question is the images were never the same because the clouds constantly pass by in different sizes and shapes, similar to how the scenes in a movie would change. Let's look at another inferential question. Identify the mood in stanza 2 and give an example to support your answer. The mood in stanza 2 can be described as excited, optimistic, or hopeful. One example which supports this mood is found in the line, "From my imagination, a million things did escape." If you remember the poem correctly, you would recall that in this stanza, the poet spoke of creating movies from his imagination, his mind's eye. Let's consider this question. Give a synonym for my mind's eye in stanza 2. I'm sure you would have gotten this one correct already. And a synonym for my mind's eye is my imagination. Let's consider this question. What in the poem is referred to as a movie? Explain your answer. Remember, this question has two parts. To get the question correct, you must answer both parts of the question. Let's take a look at our answer. The clouds passing by in the sky are referred to as a movie. This is because the clouds are continuously passing in different shapes and sizes. It feels like a movie is being played to the person watching the clouds. Let's have a look at an evaluation appreciation question. Why is the word movie a suitable description for the action of the cloud? Well, the word movie is a suitable description for the action of the clouds because a movie plays a story over time. Similarly, the person watching the clouds pass by for hours on end feels like a movie is being played. Let's consider this question. State two ways in which the language of the poem affects you being the reader. Well, I'm sure when you read this poem at the beginning, when the poet spoke about lying on his back, looking at the clouds, you felt calm and serene, as you would have when he spoke about the birds singing a lullaby. So, one answer would be, I feel peaceful, relaxed, contented. When the poet spoke of creating movies from his imagination, I'm sure that you would have felt creative as well. It would have even made you feel a bit happy or hopeful. So you can say, I feel happy and hopeful, like I can do anything. Finally, let's consider this question. How does the poet make you feel about clouds? Give a reason for your answer. Remember again, this is a two-part question, and to be able to get full marks for this question, you need to answer both parts of the question. This poem makes me realize that I love to look at clouds. Who wouldn't? They go floating by with their fluffy white cells, creating images and movies. I'm sure that you would have looked at a cloud and would have seen a dog or an elephant or even yourself in the cloud. Why does the person like to look at clouds? Because they are fascinating with many different shapes that remind me of objects and things that I know. Here is where I say thank you for joining me for today's program. I do hope that you had fun and you enjoyed learning. Be sure to visit www.moe.govtt for more online resources, and I look forward to you joining me for another exciting program again as we help you get prepared for SEA.